Are you thinking about learning PHP today? Well, let me show you why this is a brilliant choice. PHP has been around for decades and powers over 75% of the web. Yes, this also means it's an old language, but that's actually a strength. Languages that survive and thrive this long do so for good reasons. They solve real problems, they are reliable, and they have proven themselves in production. And PHP has transformed dramatically in recent years. So PHP 8 brought significant performance improvements, a JIT compiler, constructor property promotion for cleaner class syntax, and much more. PHP 8.1 introduced fibers for better concurrency, and PHP 8.2 added read-only class. So PHP today is incredible fast, features modern syntax, and with the PHP Foundation driving its development, the language is more active than ever. What makes PHP special is how approachable it is. So you can start building real projects in like days. But PHP also grows with you, and it's equally capable of powering complex enterprise applications that serve millions of users like Facebook, Wikipedia, or WordPress do. And then the ecosystem, it's massive. It's centered around Composer and packages. And there are over 300,000 packages for you to choose from. So whatever you're building, there's probably a package out there to help you with your next project. And then there's Laravel, which takes PHP to the next level. So whether you're building a full-stack application or integrating a Vue or React frontend, Laravel makes complex features feel quite simple while following modern development best practices. If you're new to PHP or don't have it installed yet on your machine, don't worry, we'll fix that right now. Whether you're planning to follow along with this course or getting ready for your Laravel development, setting up your environment hasn't been easier, and the Laravel docs is the best start for this new journey. So first we have this one command wonder. It's a single command that installs everything you need. It downloads PHP, Composer, PHP's package manager, the Laravel installer, and everything as binaries, making them globally accessible on your machine. And the best part here is it doesn't interfere with your existing development at all. It simply adds the binaries that you need. After running the command, just type php-v in your terminal of your choice to verify the installation, and you are ready to go. A little side note here, if you're already using Homebrew for your local development, you can also use it to install PHP. And then we also have Laravel Herd. So if you prefer a more visual approach, Laravel Herd has got you covered. It's a sleek app that handles everything from installing PHP, Composer, the Laravel installer, through a very user-friendly interface. It sits quietly in your menu bar, giving you access to manage your development environment on Mac or on Windows. While the free version provides everything that you need for this cause, there is also Herd Pro, which adds advanced debugging feature and services for those who want to take your development workflow to the next level. Just pick the option that feels right for you. Both will have you writing PHP in no time. In the next video, we'll start exploring PHP basic syntax and get our hands dirty with some actually coding. Just one more thing, throughout this course, many examples will be shown in our online PHP editor. This makes it easy to follow along and try out code yourself, even without having PHP installed on your machine. However, it's still recommended to install PHP locally, as we will need it for creating our first PHP application together at the end of this course. It's time to finally write some PHP, and we're going to start with variables. So variables, like in any other coding language, hold data that you can reuse during runtime, during your program, or you can change it. In PHP, all variables start with a $sign, which makes them quite easy to spot in your code, and then you just define what should go into this variable. So this is a number here, and you can see I don't have to define that this should be a number. I can just put in this variable what I want. I could also put in a text here, or maybe a boolean, which we'll also talk about later a bit more, like true. But let's go back to the number here. And we're going to use a function in PHP which is called var_dump, which dumps out our variable. And now this tells us what is inside this variable. And we can see we get the content of the variable, which is 404, but we also can see that this is of the type integer. So in PHP, we have two types of numbers. We have integers, and when we use a decimal here, you can see this is now a float, or you can also call it a double. And if we change this back to a text, by using quotes here, you can see that this is our text and this is now a string. And of course, like before, if we take a look at this Boolean value, you can also see that this is a Boolean value, which is true in this case. All right, let's talk a little bit more about strings. So I'm using double quotes here, but I can also use single quotes like this. And you will see this works as well. So the only difference here is let's write another variable and let's call this text. And let's say this is just a string. Yeah, and if I now try to reuse this text variable here inside the status, when we use single quotes, you can see it's not working, mainly because I forgot the semicolon here, but it's also not working because we get just a variable named $text in here. So the use case of using double quotes is here that we can use other variables inside here like this. And now you can see we get the text 404 not found in here. But besides that, we can also combine multiple strings with the dot operator. And you will see that we now get also a string back 404 not found. Yeah, so the dollar operator helps us to combine two strings. And this can be two variables or it can be just a string here and a variable. This still works the same. Yeah, so these are some of the main types in PHP. We will also have arrays and objects, but we're going to talk about those in the next videos. Let's go back to the string here. So we know this is now of the type of string, but we can also tell PHP that this should be another type. And this is called casting. We're now telling here with this casting operator that this string here should be an integer. And if we run a code, you can see we'll get an integer back. And this also works the other way around. So let's say we have an integer and we want this to be a string. This now works as well, yes. And of course, that's very important depending on if you're using maybe a database and you have some specific columns with specific values and types there, and then you want to make sure that you store the right values. So yeah, in general, it's a good idea to always make sure that you work with the types that you are expecting. And to round this up, let's also talk here about Boolean values. So let's see what the string representative of true is, which is 1. But also interesting, if you use false here, you can see false is an empty string. And also interesting, if we try to cast this to a number, so false is 0 and true is also 1 here, which is, yeah, it's also what you would expect here. But also something that's quite unique and special in PHP, we have automatic type conversion, which is just a fancy term for type juggling. So let me show what this means. So if I have here a string, let's say 404 again, and I'm going to add 4, the number, an integer. So what do you think will happen now? So in many programming languages, this will fail because it's trying to add an integer to a string, which is, yeah, mostly not working, but in PHP, this is working and we get 408 back. So PHP tries to be very smart about this and sees, okay, we have here a number inside here, there's text here, and here we have a number. So let's try to make an integer out of it, which is 404. But of course, if we try to add this with the dot operator, it will just add it to the string. So this is something that you have to be aware of because you might end up with results that you are not expecting. But yeah, that's all about variables for this video. We're going to reuse them now in probably all of our other videos. So yeah, this is already a good start. Arrays are one of PHP's most powerful features. So if you're coming from JavaScript, you found them particularly interesting as they both combine the functionality of JavaScript arrays and objects. Arrays in PHP are incredibly versatile and widely used. So you're going to use them a lot, so let's explore how they work together. Basically, we have two types of arrays in PHP. Let's start with a simple one. This is a numeric array. Let's put in here some colors, red, green, and maybe blue. And as you can see, I'm opening and closing them with square brackets. And this is how we can create a numeric array. Let's use the var dump method again to take a look at what's inside this variable. And this is what our numeric array looks like. On the right here, we have our strings, and on the left, you can see we have keys. And the keys are numeric. That's why they're called numeric arrays. And they start by 0, 0, 1, and 2. Next to that, we also have associative arrays. So let's create now a user. Again, with square brackets, I'm going to format this a little bit differently because here we have now named keys. So let's say the name of this user, maybe that's just me, Christoph, and another key, my age. I'm going to regret this, but this is 40. Oh, this hurts, but yeah, it's true. Now let's dump out this one, our user here, and you can see now on the left we have our named keys with name and age, and on the right we have our string, Christoph, with a typo. As always, let's fix this. And then with my age, which is an integer. So you can also see here we can mix types. So PHP doesn't matter if you put in a string, an integer, another array, a boolean, whatever, you can put in there anything you like. This is also something that makes it very versatile. Okay, so these are the two types of array which we have here, and you have seen we can create them quite easily with square brackets. But now let's see how we can access data. So I can dump out the whole array, but mostly we're interested in maybe a specific value. Let's start with colors again. So the way we do this is we're going to use square brackets again, and now inside them we define which element we're interested in. So for numeric arrays, we need to provide the key, which is, let's go for red, which is 0. And you can see we get red back. By the way, this of course also works with a very famous method in PHP, which is echo, which can echo out strings. So we don't see the type anymore and just the string value. If we're interested in green or blue, maybe let's go for blue, we would use the key 2. And of course, for associative arrays, this is a little bit different because now we need to define the key name. And let's go for the name here. And you can see this works as well. It's also good to notice here if we have a big array like this one with nested values. Let's dump this out first. This is our blog post. You can see we have an array with title, with the author, but then we have another array inside the array with the name of the author and the role, and then we have comments, and in the comments we have another array, and here we have one element with one of our comments for this article with the user and the text. Now if we try to get one of the values inside here of this nested array, we can do this as well. Let's use echo here again. So we're going to start by using the variable blog post. And then inside we have a named key called comments. All right, inside comments we have one array. So this means we have to select the specific one. It's the first one here, which we get with 0. And now inside this array we have named keys again. So this means here we can define the user, for example, and we should get back Jane. And you can see this is also working. So this is how you can get values from nested arrays. All right, let's go back to our colors example with red, green, and blue. Here we go. And now let's talk about some of the common operations. So we already talked about how we can get specific values, but maybe you also want to add something. So we can do this as well. We're going to use square brackets again, but now we leave them closed. And this tells PHP we want to add something to the array, to the end of the array. And let's add another string, another color, yellow in this case. And we don't see anything because we need to dump this out. Here we go, and you can see now we have added yellow. Of course, as we talked about, you could put in here anything, a number. You could also put in here another array, which in this case is an empty one. So PHP doesn't matter. You can do all of this. But this is how you can add something to an array. Okay, what else? You're probably going to need often to check how many items are inside an array. You can do this with the count method in PHP. Here you can see we have 3. And yeah, most commonly you would use something like this inside a loop. So for example, like this one here, if the count of colors, let's say if it's bigger than 1, then we're going to echo something out, maybe just a string called true, and you can see this works as well. Something that's also very common is to use the isSet method to make sure if a variable, or in this case, if a key is set. By the way, let's fix this. This looks better. And we need to get rid of this. We want just to check if it's set, we get the string true back. If we use something else, which is not set here in this scope here, you can see we don't anything back because this condition is not being matched. And by the way, we have a whole video about conditions. So if you're not familiar with this, we will talk about this in another video. Okay, I guess the only and last thing that I want to show you, we maybe also want to remove something from an array. And the most common approach is to use the unset method. And we're going to define here our array, and then we define the key. So for a numeric array, of course, we have to define the number here. And maybe let's just dump out colors again. And we should see now in this case that red is gone here. And yes, we only have green and blue here. Let's try another one. Let's try 2, and now blue should be gone. And yeah, this also works. And yeah, that's basically it for today's video about arrays. So we talked about how to create arrays, how to add items, remove items, how to work with them in conditions, what kind of types we can put into arrays here. Yeah, so I guess you have already seen how versatile and powerful arrays are in PHP. And trust me, you are going to use them a lot. Functions are essential building blocks in PHP. They help us organize our code, make it reusable, and prevent repetition. So let's explore how they work and what makes them special in PHP. We're going to create a new function with the function keyword. Then we have the name. Let's just go for create here. Then we have the parameter list, but let's keep this empty for now. And then we have curly braces, opening and closing. And inside here, we have now our function body. And inside here, we define what should happen here. So let's start very simple with an echo. Hello. Here we go. And then in order to call this here, we can just go with create, empty parameter list, and semicolon. And this should do the trick. Yes, we can see hello. So you just wrote your first function in PHP. But of course, this would be maybe a little bit too simple. So what do we want to do? Let's add a parameter. So let's go backwards. So how do we want to make this work in the end for the user? So we want to create a specific person. So maybe it's just me. I'm going to provide here my name. And then inside the function declaration here, I'm going to tell here, we have a parameter, which is, let's call this name. And then we're going to use this here. And we already learned that we can use double quotes here instead of the single quote in order to make this variable work inside the string. And if we run this now, we should see hello, Christoph. And yes, we do. Okay, we're starting again by creating a new function. We're going to call this add. And now we have two parameters. First, we have our first number, and then we have our second number. And then we are creating our function body here. And here we're going to return something. So we're not going to echo something out. We're just returning something. And we're going to return number 1 plus number 2. All right. Let's call this now. We're providing now two numbers, maybe 1 and 5. And let's see what we get back. Nothing, because we also need to echo the result out. Or we can store it in a variable, but in our case, we're just echoing out. And yeah, you can see this is also working. And you can also see it doesn't matter if we're going to return a string, or in this case, it will be an integer. We can return just anything we like, an array or whatever. Or we don't have to return anything at all. This would also work. Okay, back to our creating example here. We had Christoph here. In order to create myself, and it's still working. Yes, it does. But what we can also do is we can provide default values. So let's imagine I'm not providing here any argument. You will see that this is now failing. And it's failing because there are too few arguments passed to the create function. We can fix this by just providing an argument and parameter here, but what we can also do is we can provide a default one by giving this inside this parameter list here a value. And let's just say by default, this should be just you. And you can see this is back working, saying just hello, you. Since PHP 7, also the type system in PHP has become way better. Now we can type a lot of things here in PHP. So for example, for our add method here, we could say that the first argument and the second argument should be an integer. We're just providing here the type in front of the parameter. And we can also say that the return type should be an integer as well by using this syntax here right after our parameter list. And let's try this out. It should still run. Let's provide two values here. We get nothing back because we need to echo it out again, and it's still 6. But of course, it would fail now if we would try to return a string, which is not a number. You can see this is now failing because, yeah, we've made sure that we want to return an integer, and the same would happen or something similar if we would provide to add something here to this method, which is not an integer like we have defined it here. And yeah, this helps a lot, being very strict about your types in PHP. You can use them if you want to, you don't have to, but yeah, I myself, I'm a big fan, and also in Laravel, we use them a lot. All right, one more thing before we finish this video. So in the case of our greeting example, we could also create now a greetings variable, and let's bring in our function from before again. So we want to store a function inside this variable, and we can do this with anonymous one. So this means we don't need a name here. We're just providing the function itself, and then we need to end the statement. If we just run this code, you will see nothing is happening, which is a good sign. But if we now run this function like we would do before, but now with the variable, and we don't provide any arguments here, you can see this is still working, and it will also work. Now trying to greet Taylor, hello Taylor. Yeah, so this is also working. At the first glance, this might look a little bit strange and you're not sure how you would use this, but I tell you, this is something very powerful, and we will use it a lot, especially with Laravel together, because this makes writing PHP and then Laravel a lot of fun. And yeah, that's it for now about functions. We covered the basics here, but of course there's much more for you to learn about them, and we're going to talk about them a bit more in detail when we talk about classes, because this is mostly where you're going to use them. Loops are fundamental in any programming language, allowing us to repeat actions and work with collections of data. Let's explore the different types of loops in PHP and see how they are commonly used. We're going to start with the most common loop in PHP, which is the for each loop. And we're providing an array like this colors array here. And then we're saying for each iteration, we want to assign this current value, this one here, or this, to a new variable. And we give this a name. So this can be anything we like, but commonly you just use the singular name of your array. And then we have here the body where we can work with our item. And for now, we're just going to dump out the current color in the loop. And you can see we get 3 times the output, red, blue, and green. So this loop is working. Something also worth mentioning is that next to the item, we have also access here to the key as well with this operator here. And now we have access to the key. And if we dump it out, you can see we have numeric keys here with 0, 1, and 2. But of course, if you would use an associative array with named keys, you would get the name of the key here as well. So yeah, just good for you to remember. If you need the keys in a loop, you have access to it as well. And let's also take a look at a simple real-world example. So we have here some items inside an array with an item name here and the price. And let's say we want to sum those prices here. So we can do this by creating first an empty totals number, which is 0. Then we're going to loop over our invoice items. And let's call the singular one just item. And now what we want to do here is we want to add to the totals the current value of totals, which could be different with each iteration, plus our item price. And we already learned how we have access to this item in the array. And then the only thing left is to dump out the new totals. And you can see we get a value, and I think this is the correct one. Nice. The only little thing to mention here is we have this short syntax here where we can use plus equals, and then we get rid of this here. And this would do just the same, just adding this here to the totals and then assign the value to this variable. And yeah, that's the for each loop. You are going to use this a lot, and there are different ways you can use this. So for example, like we've seen here, we can just add something. We can also use some method calls here, maybe save some stuff to the database and so on. But yeah, we're going to learn about other approaches later. Next to the for each loop, we also have a for loop. And this is very interesting because you have way more control over the iteration. So the way it works, we have 3 different expressions here, which we need to provide. First, we have the variable we want to work with an initial value. Commonly, it's being used with $I, but you can name it whatever you want. And now you define how long you want this loop to run. So in our case, let's say as long as $I is smaller than 5. And then we can say after each iteration how we want to change the value. And we can just use plus plus in order to increase it by 1 with every iteration. All right, let's dump out again just the value and see what we get here. So very simple, we're looping over. The first value is 0, as we can see, and then it's get increased by 1. And we're just dumping out the new value. And yeah, what's interesting here is with those expressions here, we have a lot of control how we want to iterate over something. So you can use it for iterating over arrays as well by using the count of an array, but you have a lot of more possibilities. So you can also create a simple counter here, for example, by setting this to 10 at the beginning, and then say we want to run it as long as it's bigger than 0, and then we're going to decrease I every time. And now you can say we have this little counter going from 10 downwards and so on. So yeah, pretty cool loop. And yeah, you will find some nice, interesting ways in how you can use the for loop. And last, we have also a while loop. And here we're going to start with a condition. We want to run this as long, let's say our count is smaller than 5. Of course, we need to provide the count first. Let's say this is 0 at the start. And then we have our body here again, where we can now do stuff. And what we want to do is we want to dump out again the current count. And what we also want is to increase the count, and we're going to use this shortcut expression here. And let's see what we get here. Yeah, so the loop is running 5 times, starting by 0 with our initial value and then till 4, because if it gets 5, then the condition is not matched anymore. So that's the value where you want to run something as long as a specific condition is true. Similar to this, we also have a special do while loop. It's a little bit similar, but it's also different. So let me show you. We need to get rid of this here and the expression here, and now our content wouldn't be up here. All right, so what's happening? We are now saying we want to do something, the same thing as before, but then we are checking the condition. So the output is now exactly the same as before, but the difference is now that this is run no matter what the initial value is. So even if it's 100 or 1000, which is way bigger than 5, you will see that it's running the first time, but not the second time, because only after the first iteration it's checking this condition here. So yeah, this is the difference to the while loop, or just with the while loop, you would check the condition first, but here the thing you're doing is what's being run first. So it's good for you to remember, because there's situations where you want to always run this and then check the condition. Okay, so these are the main loops which we have in PHP, but there are also some specific ways to control the loop execution. So we're going to bring in here a new example with users. And every user has a name, and they have a newsletter field where we define if they want to receive the newsletter or not. So we're going to start by using a for each loop again. And let's call this singular item user. And then we would now send this to a user with a specific object or a dependency. We're going to talk about these in the next videos, but for now we're just dumping out that we would do this. Send newsletter to user, and we already know how we can get a specific value. And in this case, we want to get the name of the user. And I think this should do it. Yeah, now it's running 3 times for all of our users, and we're sending out this newsletter. All right, but yeah, we have this field for a reason. We want to make sure that in this case, Jane does not get the newsletter because she doesn't want to. So different ways we can do this. So we could, for example, just check the field here. So if user newsletter, this is our condition. If this is true, then we want to send the newsletter. Let's try this out, and it seems to be working. It's running for John and for Bob and not for Jane. But you can see this gets a little bit messy, and there are some nicer ways we can do this. So we're going to keep this condition here, and we're just moving the var dump back under here. So what we can do now, we can also control if we want to continue with this current loop or not. And we're saying if the newsletter is set to false, which we can use with the negation condition here, and then we want to continue, move on to the next iteration. And we should see the same result. Yeah, the newsletter is sent to John and to Bob, but not to Jane, because we are continuing. Next to continue, we have also the break keyword, which is a little bit similar, but the difference is that it really breaks the loop. So for the first iteration, newsletter is true. It's sending out the newsletter. For the second one, it's false, and now it's breaking the loop, so it's not getting any more to Bob. So in this case, break wouldn't be the one that you're using, but it's good for you to know that you have continue and break for you to control the execution of your loop. Okay, I think that's mostly what I wanted to show you about loops. Just one more glimpse into the future. So here we have a little example where we have numbers, an array of numbers, and then we want to get the numbers doubled. So each item should get doubled and inside this double array. And the way we're doing this, we're looping over the numbers and then we're adding it to the new array. I'll stamp out the new double array and you can see it's working 2, 4, 6, 8, and 10. So this is nice, but when you work with PHP and then with Laravel more, you will see that we also have collections in Laravel, which are very handy and where you can do something very similar, but in a more elegant and more readable syntax. Let me show you. The way we could do the same with Laravel collection would be we're using our array, but we're wrapping this now into a collection, which is a class. We get a new instance and then we can run some nice methods on it, which really tells us what we're doing. We're mapping over each item, and here's what we do with each item. We're just doubling this out. And when you work more with Laravel, we see that collections are super powerful, and especially when you have some more things that you need to iterate over your collection. If you need to modify it in more ways, you will have here some more function, and this will be super readable. So yeah, just a glimpse into Laravel. You're going to love collections a lot. I can tell you that already. But yeah, so far so good. This is all about loops for this video. And in the next video, we're finally going to take a look at classes in PHP. Classes are a crucial part of modern PHP development. Think of a class as a blueprint. It defines what properties and methods your objects will have. And objects in PHP help you to organize related data and functionality together in a reusable way. We're going to start very simple by creating our first class here. By the way, we're still working here in this online editor. Normally for every class you would have a separated file, but we're going to take a look at this in the later videos where we're also going to use an IDE in order to work on a PHP project, but we are still keeping it here simple with our online editor. So the class keyword is what we're going to start with, and then we'll give our class a name, and I'm going to call this product. So this is our product class, and we have open and closing curly braces. That's basically already it to define a class. We all can already create it. We can instantiate it. That's what we call when we create an object of a class. So we're going to store this, and let's call this product, and we're going to create a new one with the new keyword, then the class of the name, and then parentheses. All right, and let's just also dump this out. Our first product, our first PHP object. And here it is. Nothing fancy about this yet. It's empty because we haven't defined anything for this class yet. But yeah, that's what we're going to do now. So again, classes are very important, classes and objects, in order to define and store some data and functionality inside a class, inside a way that we can reuse and structure it. So we're going to start by creating our first property. We have an access level. We're going to talk about this in a bit, but for now we're just saying this should be public and available anywhere. Then we have our type. Let's start with a string because we will give now our product a name. Okay, so access level, the type, and then the name of this property. If we run again, we can see our object has already a name, but nothing is in this name yet. So we have to do this. So we can already talk about something very special in PHP, a special method, which is called the constructor. And we create this again with the public access level. And now we're creating a function. And this is a special one with double underscore called construct. And you will see we have a lot of very special magical methods in PHP, which start with underscore, just so you better know that they are special. And this is special because the constructors run every time we create a new product. So currently, if we create a new product, this is being run. We don't see it yet, but it is run under the hood. And the most important part of our constructor is to deal with data that we want to provide to our classes. So let's say we want to create a new product, and let's call this maybe laptop. And now we want to assign this string to this name, which is then stored inside our object. We can just do this by saying this is a name here. And then inside this body, we have access to properties or access to this current class with this. So this always refers to our current product here inside this object. And then we say that the name. So now we don't need the $sign anymore. We just need the name here. And then we assign $name to our name property. So if you run this, you will see already the output is a little bit different because now name already has here a value, which is a string, which is laptop, which is what we have provided here. Awesome. So we've created now our first product here, which is a laptop, and it already has a name. So, and this should be now an integer, and this is the price of our product. So this means we want to provide here next to the name also a price. Let's say this is 100, probably dollars. And then we say we also expect the price to come in through the constructor. And then we're also going to define the value of this property by using the one which we get here through the constructor. Okay, so again, we're providing it here when we create our new class. This gets to the constructor. This is now the second argument. That's how we know this is the price. And then we're going to set this to our internal property. All right, let's take a look what we get here. Yeah, you can see now we have a property here which is available and which has an integer value of 100. It's already a good idea to tell you that we have a little nicer approach here to handling properties in PHP since PHP 8. And the better way we can define this is we don't define them here outside. We can define our properties, or maybe let's bring them back here. We can define them inside our constructor. So let's give us some space here. And I'm going to paste in here our properties. We can do this now. And now we only need commas here to separate them. And we don't need to assign them here inside the body. So this is now what a modern constructor will look like in PHP. So we're defining through the constructor not only the parameters, but we also define their access level. Again, we will talk about this in a bit, but also the type. So this means this should still work the same, and it does. And this is now a way nicer and cleaner syntax in order to work with constructor and properties in your PHP classes. And of course, we can also access these values here directly. So let's echo out now our product's name. We do this with the arrow operator, and this works, or the same goes with the price. Yes, this also works. All right, now let's create our own first function, and we do this very similar to the constructor. We have an access level public, then a function, and then the name, and this will be one to define if our product is expensive or not. And I'm also going to use here the return type. I'm saying this should be Boolean. And the way we define this very simple here, we have access to the price again through this and the arrow operator. And we're going to check if the price is bigger than 100. And if it is, then we're going to say this is expensive. So let's use var_dump here again. And now we're accessing a method, which is very similar to a property. So is expensive, but now we have parentheses here, which tells us that this is a method. And we get back false back. Let's give us some space here. And if we make this 101, it should be true. And yeah, now this is expensive. And that's how you can access your properties or methods on your own PHP classes. Cool. Let's go briefly back to the access level. So for now, we have set everything here to public. So for properties and for functions or methods, methods is just a more fancy name for functions that belong to your class. They have an access level, and this defines where and how you can call them. Currently, we have set them to public, so this means you can run them from everywhere, like here from outside this object. But if you would change this to protected, this will now fail because call to protected method, which is not allowed in this case. And the same would happen with the third access level, which we have, which is private. But let's bring this back here so this is working again. Yeah. So public you're going to use if you want to make your properties and methods accessible from everywhere. If you use protected, you can only use them from within the same class and extended classes. We're going to talk about extending class in a bit. And with a private, if you have a private method, let's change this again like this, then this method will be only accessible from within this product. So I can't access it from the outside anymore. But yeah, you often also have methods that you're just going to use inside your class. But you will learn more about this the more you start working with PHP. Let's get back to public here for our example. Okay, so I mentioned inheritance and extending another class. Let's get rid of this and let me bring in here another product class. Okay, there's another product class, very similar to what we had before. We now have a constructor here. We have a has discount and get description method. Let's just create this product here. We'll create new product and let's dump this out just so we see that this is working. And of course, it's not because we need to provide here a name, laptop, and a price here. Okay, now it's back working. Okay, so far so good. So sometimes you end up with a product like laptop here, but then later on your product class is working, but then you I'm realizing that you have different kind of products. So let's say you have a laptop, but maybe you also have an application. Now this is a digital product. It doesn't make any difference here in this case, but let's say a digital product has a different method. So for example, a digital product might have a link. So let's add here a new method, get link. We're going to return a string and we're just returning here the application link. Normally you might get this from a database or somewhere else, but we're just providing here a string. And now let's say we want to get the link of this product and this works. But of course, if we go back to our laptop example, now our laptop has also a method called getLink, which doesn't really make sense because this is something that would be only useful for digital products. And this is a use case where inheritance makes a lot of sense. So let's get rid of this. And what we're going to do is now we're going to create another class. And this is called digital product. All right, and now what we're doing here is we're going to bring in our method here. Get link, okay, cool. And now we're creating here a digital product. Again, this is our app and everything should still work, and it does. But of course, if we try now to get one of those other methods here, this will not work anymore because this get description method is not part of our digital product. It's part of the default product class. So now what you could do is you could copy this get description method and put it inside your digital product as well. But of course, now you end up with duplicated code, which is not what we want. So what we can do in PHP, we can say we want to extend our product class. And now you will see this is working again. We have the get description. We have the, was it still is expensive? I believe. Let's try it out. No, what was it? Oh, it has discount. That's the one which I wanted to try. False. Yeah, so this also works. So this is a very good example of using inheritance where we just say the product class is our parent class and the digital product is our child class. We want to reuse all the functionality of a product, but we want to add some specific features which are only accessible or should be only accessible for digital products in this case. And then you're going to probably end up with a bunch of more specific products which have some specific features. And this is a good way to separate those concerns. And that's why inheritance is very powerful inside of PHP. All right, so far so good. We talked about how you can create your first class, how you can define your constructor, the parameters, the data that it will receive, how you can store this inside your class, use functions or methods in this case, but also we talked about extending a class and using inheritance. Okay, but again, this is just a start when we talk about classes and objects, but it's a solid foundation which you will need for our next videos and also for working with Laravel, which of course is our end goal here. PHP has evolved significantly in recent years. So let's take a look at some modern features that make PHP code cleaner, safer, and more enjoyable to write. These features are especially relevant when working with frameworks like Laravel. So here's a user class very similar to what we had already before with our product class. We're defining here the properties, and then we have a constructor where we receive data from the outside and then we assign it to our properties. But I've already shown you that there's a nicer way to write this, and this is possible since constructor property promotion, which we have in PHP since version 8.0. So what we're doing here is we are getting rid of the assignment of the properties here, and we're doing all of this in the constructor. So we're just adding here full, the access level, the type, and the name, and the same public string email. And now we have defined those here, and then we also don't need to assign them anymore. This now works automatically, just defining them here in the constructor. And this is now so much cleaner than before. And this is such a cool feature. I really love this one. And since we're already here, another one is we also have read-only properties. So you can define a property, public read-only string name in this case. So this is now read-only. So if we create a new user with a name and an email, and let's just echo out the user's email. You can see this works. It also works for the name. Here we go. But something which we can also do, I think we haven't covered this yet, but you can also change public values. So let's say the name is now Taylor and not Christoph anymore. And if we try to do this, maybe let's start here with the email. Doesn't matter that it's not a name, it's still working. But if we try to do this now on the name, you will see this will fail because we cannot modify read-only properties. Because that's exactly what we're trying to do here. We have a read-only property. We want this to be only readable and not to get overridden like we do here. So very cool feature as well. Change this back to the email where we can change stuff. And yeah, you can see it's working if we try to override this one. So not a very cool feature which we have in PHP since version 8.1. Okay, something else. Let me bring in here another example. So here we have a switch expression. So we haven't talked about this yet, but this is possible in PHP. So let's imagine you have a status, which comes from somewhere else. Let's just say this is 200. And then inside the switch here, expression here, we're checking what is the value of the status. And then we have different cases. So if the value is 200, then we're going to assign this string here to this variable. If 204, it's this string, and so on. If it's something else, then we have this default value. So in this case, let's echo out what we now got with the result here, and it should be success, and it is. And of course, if we change this now to something else, which we haven't defined, where we don't have a case for this, and now this is being matched, and we get this string. By the way, yeah, we also have those breaks here in between to end every case. And yeah, this has been in PHP for a very, very long time. Nothing bad about this, but yeah, there is now a little bit nicer way in order to deal with those examples. So what we can do now is we now have a new match operator, match expression, so where we can directly get the result. So first, this is the same. We're receiving one value, which in this case is status. And then we don't have cases anymore. We have a value, and if this is matched, we assign with this arrow operator here a specific value here. And we also don't need to assign the variable here because we have this already at the beginning. So the only thing we need is something like this. Let me get this changed for the other cases as well. And now it looks like this. So you can see this is already way cleaner than before, way less code. You can already see this is what we're looking for. This is what we're returning. No variable assigning here in every case. We do this at the beginning. And yeah, this is just so cool. And if we run this, you can see this is still working. Let's try out 200 again. And we get success back as it should be. So take a look at the match expression. It's very powerful and very clean to use in your PHP applications. Okay, here we go. Our next example. We have two classes here. One is for the address, where we have a method here to get a country. In this case, it's Austria. And here we have an order. And here we can get the address of a specific order. And then we're here creating a new order. So what we're going to do, we want to get the country of the order. And the way that we would do this is by using the order, then get the address, and then we can chain calls. Normally would get here back an instance of the address. So this means we should also be able to get the country directly. This is how we would get our country. But this is failing now because we're calling a member function get country on null. So this means we're trying to run this method get country on something that here is null. And this is failing because, yeah, this doesn't work like that in PHP. But usually if we would return here a real address, this code would work. But we also have to encounter for situations where this order doesn't have an address yet. And one way to do this is we could say the country is null. And then we're checking if order get address. So if this is available, let's get this up here. And only if this is the case, then we want to change the country, and then we're going to reuse this again, order, get address, get country. So what you can see now is we don't have any errors anymore if we run this. And if we var dump out our country, you will see the value is now null. And by the way, we haven't talked about what null means. It's a data type in PHP, which just means there is no value. So it's different from something being set to false, 0, or an empty string, because these are all values, but null just means there is no value set. And that's exactly what we have defined here. And since this condition is not being matched because we get null back here, it jumps directly here and dumps out the country, which is still null. So this is one way you could overcome the issue if this method returns something which is null, which is the case in our example here. But of course, these if conditions are not very readable, and if we have to write them a lot, this is not so much fun. So we can do something different now. So what we're doing now, we're now trying the same. We're going for the order, and then we're using get address, but then we're assigning here a null operator, which we're defining here with this question mark. And only if this is not null, so this is what this means, then we're going to go for get country. And this code should now still work. Yes, we get null back, so exactly what we do, but still it would also work if we get an address here, but it also works if we don't get. And yeah, this is how we can change this. If this would give us back another instance, we could run another operator again with this on it if we want to. But yeah, that's basically the null save operator, which was introduced in PHP 8.0, and it just makes sure that it's not throwing an error here. If this is null, it just returns null, because that's what we're saying here. Hey, if this is not given, if this is not what it should be, then just return null and don't move on anymore with what's coming after this. So give this a look and play a little bit around with the null save operator, because this is something that you will use quite regularly, and it's a pretty cool feature to make your code way cleaner and more readable. All right, let's get rid of this. So I'm bringing back here the product example, which we already had before. Let's create a new product together. And let's say this is a new product, and I'm going to provide a name. Let's go for laptop again, and it costs $100 in this case. All right, so this is working. And the way that, again, it works, we're providing two parameters here. And the first one is the name, and the second one is the price. And for us in this case, it's obvious that this is the name and this is the price. But there might be situations where you have a lot of properties, and some of them are being set to be optional. Like we could set them to null, and we also need to define. We can also do this with a question mark, saying that this should be a float, but it could also be null, which is sometimes very helpful, because yeah, it could be that this is just not defined and you don't need it every time. But when it's there, it should be a float, but when it's not there, it can be just null. So that's what we're saying here. And let's create a couple of these here. So let's say maybe that's the before price, and this is the after price, something like that. And all of these are optional. And if you now want to define what the after price is, the way that this would work now, let's give us a little bit more space here. So we're first defining that laptop is the name and the price. In this case, let's say we don't want to define it, but we want to define the after price. So what we now have to do is we want to say that this is null. All right. Then the before price, the next one should also be null. And then the after price, we're going to set to 100. So make sure this works. Yes, okay, this does. So yeah, this is now a little bit strange, because you have to define all those optional values just in order to also define this last one here, yeah, which is a little bit cumbersome and not that readable and nice to use. So that's why we now have a way better way to do this with named arguments in PHP 8.0. And the way this works, we can define the name of the property before the value. So this is for the name, then this is for the price, colon, this is the before price, and this is the after price. Let's try this out. Yeah, you can see this is still working. And for now, it just looks like we have more code than before. And yeah, it's the case. But the good thing about this is we can now get rid of the optional ones, because we don't need to define them anymore. Let's get rid of this. Let's try to run this, and you can see this is now still working. We're just defining here the first argument and the last one, and this now works by defining those named arguments here, or using those named arguments here to tell PHP exactly what those values are for. And yeah, this is especially useful if you first want to make clear what those values mean, because now it's readable. Okay, this is the name and this is the after price. Because if we don't have this, it would be quite difficult to see what this means if you don't have this class open. So this means for readability could be one reason to use them. And the second one is to define the order in how you want to assign those values, and that you don't need to define the one which are default and which you don't want to change here through the constructor. So yeah, named arguments, also a very, very cool feature in PHP, which I've already been using a lot in my projects, and we at Laravel use this a lot too. And then lastly, also something which is new, which we see here, are those types here, which we can define for our arguments here for this class. So type properties is something which we have in PHP since 7.4. So we didn't have this before, so you could just provide anything in here. But yeah, now with the types, we can be very specific about what type this value should be. And that's also something that good developers use all the time, because yeah, this is very helpful and gives a lot of strictness to your code, which helps to prevent a lot of bugs. So yeah, these were some of the new features which we have in PHP, and what makes PHP more joy to write, safer, and gives us cleaner code. And yeah, there's much more coming. The ecosystem and PHP itself is very active, and yeah, we get a lot of very cool features now with every release, which is really cool. Composer is PHP's package manager and an essential tool for modern development. It helps you to manage your project's dependencies, it helps you with auto-loading your classes, and almost every modern project uses Composer. And by the way, Laravel itself is installed via Composer. And popular packages like Gazelle, Carbon, or PHP Unit are all distributed through Composer. You can find these packages and many more on packages.org. So this is PHP main package repository with over 300,000 packages for you available. And yeah, think of it as NPM for PHP. So whatever you need, you're going to find it here as a dependency for your project. In order to find out if you have Composer installed, you can just run Composer version. But if you have used the methods which we've shown you to install PHP in Composer, you should have it already on your machine. All right, I'm here in a brand new directory called Composer Project. So this will be our example project for this video. And we can start creating a new Composer project with Composer in it. And this will ask us a few questions. In the end, it will create a composer.json file, which holds all the information we need in order for our application. So we have here a package name, which consists of the vendor. Normally that's just the name or of the company, and then the name of the project. So in this case, I can leave it with the default value, which I can just accept by click enter. The description, our new project, and then the author, which is just me. Stability version, we don't care. There are different types of projects. So there's a library, which is something that you would install into your project. But in our case, it's a project which we're creating here. So let's just stick with project, which is the default one. You can also define the license and much more. So what we also can do is we can define our dependencies. And let's just do this here for this demo application. So what do we need as a dependency? One thing that many packages need is the Gazelle HTTP client, which helps you a lot to create HTTP calls to specific services or talk to APIs. We have this at number 0, so let's bring this in. Let's just use the latest version here. And we're good for this now. And now we're going to get asked about our dev dependency. So these are dependencies which we only need locally. So this means if we deploy our application, we don't need those dependencies there. So let's also add one for this as well. And the very common one is PHP Unit, which we use in PHP for testing. Again, we're just using here the latest version. And I think we are good to go. Composer Init also helps us to set up auto-loading, which is something which is very important when working with PHP. classes and namespaces. We haven't talked about namespaces, but we're going to do that in the next video, where we're going to create a real little project together. And this is now what our compose.json file looks like, but we're going to take a look at this directly in an editor in a bit. So let's install our dependencies as well. Here we go. And now we have our project open up in PHP Storm, which is a very famous editor for PHP. Of course, there are a lot of other editors and IDEs you can use. We will also link to a PHP Storm version, which is for you free to use, but there's also VS Code and other ones out there which are also free. So just pick the one that you like the most. So now let's take a look at what we created here. So this is the directory of our project. So what we have here is the composer.json file. And this is what we basically have set up with composer init in our terminal. And there again, we have the name of the project, description, our required dependencies, Guzzle in this case, and for our development PHP unit. And we have also set up auto-loading. So auto-loading again is something that's very important in PHP, so that all the specific classes which are sorted in different directories are auto-loaded in the correct way, and Composer helps us really a lot. This was really a pain before Composer, but yeah, it's way better now, and it just tells that we have now a new namespace for the source directory, and this is basically inside here where you would provide all your PHP files which you need for this application. And then again, we have some more information about this project, like the authors, and yeah, that's basically it. As a good comparison, let's also take a look at the Laravel project. So I'm here inside a new Laravel project, and as you can see, there is a lot going on, and you're going to learn about all of that in our other course about Laravel. But yeah, I want to go down here and just show you that basically this whole Laravel application is also just a Composer project here with a composer.json file. And if we check this out, you can see it basically looks very similar to our simple project here, with just some information about the application. We also have your keywords, more about license, some more packages which we need especially for development, a little bit more about auto-loading. And then we can also define scripts which you can run through your terminal, which are also pretty cool. But yeah, there's a lot more for you to discover on your PHP and Laravel journey. But yeah, basically I just wanted to show you that even a Laravel project at its bone is just a Composer project, and very similar to the simple one which we just created together. And that's also all that I wanted to show you today about package management in PHP. When you start working with Laravel, you will see that Composer is used extensively for managing packages and auto-loading, and it's just a fundamental tool that makes modern PHP development possible. In the next video, it's finally time for us to build our own first little PHP application together. For our final video, let's put everything we've learned into practice by building a simple command line weather checker. We'll use Composer packages, work with an external API, and create a real and hopefully useful application together. In order to receive information about the current weather for a city, we're going to use the Open Weather service. And yeah, it helps us to find the weather information about a specific city, like Vienna here. And it has a nice API which we can use for free up to 1,000 calls. We're going to create this weather app from scratch, and we're going to use Composer init to create this. So I'm fine with this name and vendor and name and description, our first PHP application. Author is correct, and we can skip here view and use the default values. And yes, we would like to use some dependencies. We are going to use just one here, and we're using Guzzle again. And if we scroll up here, you can see 0 is the one which we're needing, Guzzle HTTP. Let's pick 0 here. This is the one which we're going to use to connect, to call our weather API. And we're going to use the latest version. And we don't need any more dependencies and also no dev dependencies. But we need auto-loading. Yes, that's fine. And yeah, here we go. Let's also install our dependencies now. Okay, perfect. And here is our web application opened up in PHP Storm in my editor of choice. And here we have our composer.json file like we just created it. We also have a composer log file here. When you install your dependency, this will be automatically created. And this holds all the information about your package dependencies, your package dependencies, and all the different and exact version which are being used for this project currently. And then we have a vendor folder with the code of our dependencies, and then we have a source directory. And inside the source directory, we're going to start by creating our first PHP class, and we're going to call this weather service. All right, here we go. So this will be the main class which we'll use in order to talk to the API and then return the information that we get back. So we're going to start by creating a constructor. And now let's think about what are the things that we need here. And I'm going to make those values private because we are probably not going to need to use them from the outside. And yes, we need an API key, and I'm going to set this here directly. I have already prepared this one from our weather service. And then we're also going to need an API URL, right? Let's check the endpoint. Yep, that's right. That's exactly the one which we need. And then we also need to work with the Gazelle HTTP client. And we can set this as a property. So normally we've seen that we can use string, integer, or booleans as type for our properties, but we can also say this should be of the type of the client class. And here we're creating this property, which we don't set here, but we do this inside the constructor exactly like this. So we're saying this client, which gets me this property, should now get a new instance of the client. We don't need any arguments here, and we can end this statement. PHP Storm is only complaining that we haven't used them yet, but by the way, we can also make those two values read-only. But yeah, again, we are providing those here through the constructor using constructor property promotion, because we can do this right in the constructor, but with the clients, the instance which we have to set, we need to mention this above here separately. Okay, so far so good. Now we need to add here a public function. So this will be the function that we then can call from the outside, and we're going to call this getWeather. And we want to receive here the city, which is a string. And then in the end, we want to return an array from this function. All right, and now we want to talk to the API and get information about a specific city. So we're going to make use of our client here, which has a get method to make a get request. Then we're providing our API URL, this is correct. And then we have here some arguments that we can pass. And the one that we want to set is query. I'm going to set this real quick, and then we talk about what we have here. So yeah, autocompletion is already pretty good here. So we're going to say that we want to adapt this API URL and add some query parameters to this URL. And the way that this works, this is just a fancy way of saying here we want to add the city, for example, which would we do with QCity. And then we maybe want to add the app ID, which is the API key, and so on. This is exactly the same. We're just doing this here through PHP code because it is a little bit better to read. So Q is our search term, and we're searching for a specific city. Then we're providing the API key. It's called app ID on this weather service. And then we are setting the units to metrics because these are the only units that I can read. Okay, then we're going to get here response back if the request is successful. And now we want to get our weather data working here nicely. So let's check what we're doing. So we get a response back, which is an object. So it's a specific instance. Then we want to get the body. We're calling this method. And then on this, we're going to call the get content. And this will give us back a string, which is JSON, which we then decode in order to get an array. And we're also using the second parameter true to get an associative array back. Okay, so inside our weather data variable, we now have all this information. And then the only thing left is to return this from this method. And I have already prepared this. So we are returning an associative array with the key city, temperature, description, and humidity. And here we're just getting this information from the weather data, which we just got back from our API endpoint. And this should be it for this class. Here, this is looking good now. And now let's think about how do we want to call this. So in the end, this will be a command line interface application. So we want to run this from the console. And the way that we're going to do this is very simple, but we're saying we want to run through PHP a specific PHP file. And then we're providing a city like Vienna. So this is our end goal here. So this means we need this weather.php file inside the root of our project. So let's create a new PHP file. Let's call this weather.php. All right. And inside here, we now want to make use of our weather service. But before we can do this, we need to require the autoload file, which Composer created for us. So this makes sure that we have access to all the different classes inside of our source directory, which we want to make use of because we want to make use of our weather service here. Okay, and now we create a new instance of our weather service. New weather service exactly like this. Then we're defining a city. We're doing this statically here for now. I'm just saying this is Vienna. And then we get the weather now by calling the public get weather method of our weather service here, and we provide the city. And let's just dump out the weather here so that we can see if it's working. Let's run this already, and yeah, you can see we already get some information back. It's not very nicely to read, but it is there, so that means it's already working. So we've made a successful call to a specific API, we get some data back, and we're going to return it here to our command line, which is already pretty cool when you think about it. Let's just make this output a little bit nicer. It looks a little bit more messy here, but the output will be nicer. So we just have here some echo statements here in order to tell what's going on. This is going to create a new line. And then we have some structured information which we provide to the command line. And if we run this now again, you can see, yeah, we're getting the weather for Vienna. See this Vienna temperature is nicely here, clear sky, humidity 58, so perfect condition for today's tutorial. And yeah, when you think about it, this is already pretty cool. It's working. We've made use of an API. We get some information. We can run this through the command line. Just a few little things that I want to do here. First, we don't want to define this here. We want to define this through the console. And as you've noticed, we haven't set this. So this is a global variable which is available, which just gets the arguments through the console. And we're just saying here we want to get the second argument because the first one is the weather PHP file and the second one is the city. By the way, let's try it out. It's still working. Let's see if we change this now to Barcelona. It's also working. Thunderstorm with light rain. Oh, so we have better weather here in Vienna. Good to know. So yeah, pretty cool. We can now define this through the console. And yeah, one thing that's now not working anymore, if we forget to provide this, we will get this messy error when we try to make use of city, which is now not a string, which is null. And the way that we can prevent this is also quite nicely. We can just say if we have another argument argc, so this gives us the amount, the count of how many arguments we got, and if it's smaller than 2, so we want to make sure we get at least 2 arguments, the PHP file and the city. And if it's smaller, then we want to echo out, let's say correct usage is php weather.php.city. All right, and then we want to exit after that because we don't want to move on with the rest of the code, which we can do with the exit method. Okay, let's try now again. Yeah, now we can see this message here. And if we use a city again, let's go for Chicago. You can see it's back working. Awesome. So that's it for your first PHP application, for our web application here. But of course, yeah, there are a few things that we could or should improve. So for example, it's not a good idea to use API keys directly in your code. You normally would include them through an environment variable. That's one thing. Then also there are really nice frameworks out there to build beautiful command line interface application, something like we did here, but with nicer output and nicer input. So that's also a good idea to check them out as well. And then it's also a good idea to handle exceptions. So PHP Storm is telling us here that there might be a Guzzler exception, and it's also a good idea to handle this. But yeah, that's something that you can still look into and try to improve for yourself. Thank you for completing this PHP Fundamentals course. You now have a solid foundation in modern PHP, from basic syntax to classes and composer. But PHP truly shines when building web applications, especially with frameworks like Laravel. So Laravel takes all these PHP concepts we've learned and provides a powerful toolkit for building everything from a simple website to complex web application. Are you ready to continue your journey? Check out our next course about getting started with Laravel.